Your peers and your teachers will present excerpts from journalism, memoir, poetry, and novels, all representing the voices, ideas, and experiences of immigrants. Listen carefully. You may hear voices that reflect your own. However, just like when you go from a dark room, like the room that we're in, to a room filled with light, and your eyes seem momentarily blinded, you may also hear voices, ideas, words that initially make you feel uncomfortable. We are hoping that this presentation will encourage you to appreciate these accounts as expressions of real experiences. We also hope that this event will help you appreciate literature in all of its forms, use its power, as well as the power of your own creativity to share your own voice. This is a combined effort of many of your fellow Brahmas. Please remain respectful during this presentation. Above all, listen. You'll be able to return to these documents later. But for now, please put your phones away. Thank you. And listen to these amazing words. Let's go ahead and read something out loud. Yay. Thank you.
Active in the early 20th century, Upton Sinclair won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction writing in 1943. More properly, called a muckraker, Sinclair was a writer, intent on exposing corruption in government and on revealing the failures of social justice in American society. He wrote The Jungle after spending several weeks working in disguise in a meatpacking plant in Chicago. While The Jungle exposes the dreadful conditions of the meatpacking industry, it is also a story of Jurgis Rodriguez and his family. They have immigrated from Lithuania to redeem the promise of the American dream. While much of what they experience is horrible and tragic, the story begins with the optimism and joy of Jurgis's and Ona's wedding. Amid the ever-present specter of poverty, the wedding party and guests do their best to retain the culture they have brought to America from abroad. Listen to this excerpt from The Jungle. After this, there's beer for everyone, the musicians included, and the revelers take a long breath and prepare for the great event of the evening, which is the Acts Via Venus. The Acts Via Venus is a ceremony in which, once begun, will continue for 3 or 4 hours, and it involves one uninterrupted dance. The guests form a great ring, locking hands, and when the music starts up, begin to move in a circle.
In the center stands the bride, and one by one, the men step into the enclosure and dance with her. Each dances for several minutes, as long as he pleases. It is a very merry proceeding, with laughter and singing, and when the guest is finished, he finds himself face to face with Teta Elzbieta, who holds the hat. Into it, he drops a sum of money, $1, or perhaps $5, according to his power and his estimate of the value of the privilege. The guests are expected to pay for this entertainment. If they be proper guests, they will see that there's a neat sum left over for the bride and bridegroom to start life upon.
Most fearful they are to contemplate the expenses of this entertainment. They will certainly be over $200 and maybe $300. And $300 is more than the year's income of many a person in this room. There are able-bodied men here who work from early morning until late at night, in ice-cold cellars with a quarter of an inch of water on the floor. Men who for 6 or 7 months in the year never see the sunlight from Sunday afternoon till the next Sunday morning, and who cannot earn $300 in a year.
There are little children here, scarce in their teens, who can hardly see the top of those work benches, whose parents have lied to get them their places, and who do not make the half of $300 a year, and perhaps not even a third of it. And then to spend such a sum, all in a single day of your life, at a wedding feast. For obviously it is the same thing, whether you spent it at once for your own wedding, or in a long time, at the weddings of all your friends.
It is very imprudent, it is tragic, but it's so beautiful. Bit by bit, these poor people have given everything else. but to this they cling with all their power of their souls. They cannot give up the basileia. To do that, it will mean not merely to be defeated, but to acknowledge defeat. And the difference between these two things is what keeps the world going.
The basileia has come down to them from a far-off time, and the meaning of it was that one might dwell within the cave and gaze upon shadows, provided only that once in his lifetime he could break his chains and feel his wings and behold the sun. Provided that once in his lifetime he might testify to the fact that life, with all its cares and its terrors, is no such great thing after all, but merely a bubble upon the surface of a river, a thing that one may toss about and play with as a juggler tosses his golden balls, a thing that one may quaff like a goblet of rare red wine. Thus, having known himself for the master of things, a man can go back to his toil and live upon the memory of all his days.
Introduction to Farewell to Manzanar by Jean Wakatsuki Houston and James Houston. During World War II, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were, by order of President Franklin Roosevelt, incarcerated in internment camps. Published in 1973, Farewell to Manzanar is a memoir that relates the experiences of Jean Wakatsuki and her family before, during, and after their relocation to the Manzanar internment camp. Jean is an American-born child of Japanese immigrants. From within the raised awareness of social injustice and inequality that has defined the American movement for civil rights, Farewell to Manzanar does what all great literature does. It gives voice to the truth of Wakatsuki's experience. In this excerpt, Jean returns to the 6th grade after the family has been released from the camp.
When the 6th grade teacher ushered me in, the other kids inspected me, but not unlike I myself would study a new arrival. She was a warm, benevolent woman who tried to make this first day as easy as possible. She gave me the morning to get the feel of the room. The afternoon, during a reading lesson, she finally asked me if I cared to try a page out loud.
I had not yet opened my mouth, except to smile. When I stood up, everyone turned to watch. Any kid entering a new class wants, first of all, to be liked. This was uppermost in my mind. I smiled wider, then began to read. I made no mistakes. When I finished, a pretty blonde girl in front of me said, quite innocently, "Gee, I didn't know you could speak English." She was genuinely amazed. I was stunned. How could this have even been in doubt?
It isn't difficult now to explain her reaction, but at age 11, I couldn't believe anyone could think such a thing, say such a thing, or regard me in that way. I smiled and sat down, suddenly aware of what being of Japanese ancestry was going to be like. I wouldn't be faced with physical attack or with aversions of hatred. Rather, I would be seen as someone foreign, or as someone as other than American, or perhaps not be seen at all.
During the years in camp, I had never really understood why we were there, nor had I questioned it much. I knew no one in my family had committed a crime. If I needed explanations at all, I conjured up vague notions about a war between America and Japan. But now, I'd reached an age where certain childhood mysteries begin to make sense. This girl's guileless remark came as an illumination, an instant knowledge that brought with it the first buds of true shame.
From that day on, part of me yearned to be invisible. In a way, nothing would have been nicer than for no one to see me. Although I couldn't have it defined at the time, I felt that if attention were drawn to me, people would see what this girl had first responded to. This is what accounts, in part, for the entire evacuation. You cannot deport 110,000 people unless you have stopped seeing individuals. Of course, for such a thing to happen, there has to be a kind of acquiescence on the part of the victims, some submerged belief that this treatment is deserved, or at least allowable. It's an attitude easy for non-whites to acquire in America. I had inherited it. Manzanar had confirmed it, and my feeling at 11 went something like this. You are going to be invisible anyway, so why not completely disappear?
But a part of me did not want to disappear. With that same sort of reaction that sent Woody into the army, I instinctively decided I would have to prove that I wasn't different, that it should not be odd to hear me speaking English. From that day forward, I lived with this double impulse, the urge to disappear and the desperate desire to be acceptable. I soon learned that there were certain areas I was automatically allowed to perform in: scholarship, athletics, and the school-time activities like the yearbook, the newspaper, and the student government. I tried all of these and made good grades, became news editor, and held office in the Girls Athletic League.
I also learned that outside school, another set of rules prevailed. Choosing friends, for instance, often depended upon whether or not I could be invited to their homes, whether their parents would allow this. And what is so infuriating, looking back, is how I accepted the situation. If refused by someone's parents, I would never say, "Go to hell," or "I'll find other friends," or "Who wants to come to your house anyway?" I would see it as my fault, the result of my failings. I was imposing a burden on them.
I would absorb such rejections and keep on looking, because for some reason the Scholarship Society and the Athletic League and the yearbook staff didn't satisfy me, were never quite enough. They were too limited, or too easy, or too obvious. I wanted to declare myself in some different way, and old enough to be marked by the internment, but still too young for the full impact of it to cow me. I wanted in.
Maria Ina-Osa is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. She currently is the producer and host of Latino USA, a public radio program and podcast that focuses on the American Latino community. Ina-Osa's essay, Coming to America, was first published as the introduction to a book written by Boston high school students. The message is clear. We are only voiceless if we choose not to use our voice. And if we do use it, we can be heroic.
We all have a coming to America story. Whether you were brought to this country as a baby immigrant like me, or whether you were born in South Boston, we all have a story of how we got to this here. When I was almost 2 years old, my mom traveled from Mexico by plane with me and my 2 older brothers and sister. We were on our way to meet my dad, who had already moved to Chicago. We would live there first and then make our way to Brookline. But on this day, we had to pass the immigration checkpoint at the Dallas airport before we made our connection to Chicago.
The super tall Texan immigration agent with a super thick accent towered over my 5-foot-tall man, who also had a very thick accent, a Mexican one. The agent inspected all of our green cards, looked my mom and the 4 kids up and down and apparently sideways, and then he belled out an order. "You are welcome to come into this country," he said, his jaw lingering. But then he looked at me. "Everyone but that little baby. I can see a rash on her skin, and she'll have to stay in quarantine."
My mom didn't feel very powerful, as she was being looked down upon in order to leave her baby behind in a new country. But she reached deep down inside and found her power in her gut and puffed up all the 5 feetness of her tiny body as tall as she could. And then, as if a volcano erupted inside her, she found her voice. She trusted her voice, and she looked up at that agent and said, "No, sir, I will not leave my daughter with you. She is coming with me. She is not sick, and I will not leave without her. Do you hear me? I will not leave her here."
The tall Texan suddenly felt very small next to my mother's big and powerful voice. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You can all come in. I'm sorry." Ever since I heard my Coming to America story, I've used it as an inspiration to find my own gut, my own power, my own voice when I feel powerless. If Mom could do that almost 50 years ago, tiny and accented and in a new country, I can surely find my own voice when I feel tiny and unheard and powerless.
Sometimes when you feel invisible, it's easy to feel voiceless. And when you feel voiceless, then you learn how to not use your voice. And when you don't use your voice, you don't hear yourself. And when you don't hear yourself, it's hard to trust who you are. I remember thinking, because I was a bit different, no one else saw the world like I did. I was a Mexican immigrant kid growing up on the south side of Chicago. There weren't a lot of other kids like me. I did feel different. I felt small. At times, I felt voiceless. I thought I was the only student who felt powerless and not part of the real America. I know now that wasn't the case. I know now that many kids felt different, but we just didn't talk about this, ever.
But with my Coming to America story, my mother showed me that your words are your power. Your voice is your instrument. Whether you speak with an accent or not, write, sing, or shout. It can be literal sounds or even your voice on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. But it's yours, and it comes from your gut, so maybe you should trust it.
First up is a short excerpt from Frank McCourt's novel, "Tis." Frank McCourt was born in Brooklyn, New York, the child of Irish immigrants. When he was 4 years old, his family moved back to Ireland, where they existed in the depths of poverty. At 19, McCourt left his family to return to New York. He eventually became a teacher, and then a best-selling and award-winning author. His memoir, "Tis," recounts McCourt's time in New York. You will hear 2 excerpts. The first considers some of the crazy cultural differences between Limerick, Ireland, and New York. In the second, McCourt uses his imagination to travel back to Limerick, where he eventually laments the economic differences between Ireland and America.
If I had the money, I could buy a torch and read till dawn. In America, a torch is called a flashlight. A biscuit is called a cookie. A bun is a roll. Confectionery is pastry, and minced meat is ground. Men wear pants instead of trousers, and they'll even say this pant leg is shorter than the other, which is silly. When I hear them saying pant leg, I feel like breathing faster. The lift is an elevator, and if you want a WC or a lavatory, you have to say bathroom, even if there isn't a sign of a bath there.
And no one dies in America. They pass away or they're deceased. And when they die, the body, which is called the remains, is taken to a funeral home, where people just stand around and look at it. And no one sings or tells a story or takes a drink. And then it's taken away in a casket to be interred. They don't like saying coffin, and they don't like saying buried. They never say graveyard. Cemetery sounds nicer.
I won't go out tonight, and I don't mind because I can stay here and turn my mind into a film about Limerick. This is the greatest discovery I've made from laying in the room. That if I can't read because of Mrs. Austin complaining about the light, I can start any kind of a film in my head. If it's midnight here, it's 5 in the morning in Limerick, I can picture my mother and brothers asleep with the dog, Lucky, growling at the world, and my uncle snoring away in his bed from all the pints he had the night before, and farting from his great feed of fish and chips.
I can float through Limerick and see people shuffling through the streets for the first Sunday Mass. I can go in and out of churches, shops, pubs, graveyards, and see people asleep or groaning with pain in the hospital at the city home. It's magic to go back to Limerick in my mind, even when it brings the tears. It's hard to pass the lanes of the poor and look into their houses and hear babies crying, and women trying to start fires to boil water in kettles for the breakfast of tea and bread. It's hard to see children shivering when they have to leave their beds for school or mass, and there's no heat in the house like the heat we have here in New York with radiators seeming away at 6 in the morning.
I'd like to empty out the lanes of Limerick and bring all the poor people to America and put them in houses with heat and give them warm clothes and shoes and let them stuff themselves with porridges and sausages. Someday, I'll make millions and I'll bring the poor people to America and send them back to Limerick fat-arsed and waddling up and down O'Connell Street in light colors.